Welcome to the Zero Input Agriculture podcast. Today I'm talking to Brad Neal, a maths teacher, but he also has a passion that I share for language and spelling reform. You might have remembered a previous episode where I talked to a conlanger, a person who actually helped set the stage for the evolution of a whole new artificial invented language with a group of people, a Viosa. But Brad is more interested in the aspects of spelling English as we know it. You probably, if you're someone who's gone to school, you'll remember that English is a horrible, slippery, diabolical language that doesn't make sense when it comes to spelling. And there's been multiple attempts over history to fix that problem. None of them have really taken off yet, but maybe in this day of high technology, another attempt will be more successful in the future. And Brad's got his finger on that pulse. So, do you want to tell us a bit more about yourself, Brad, and how you ended up interested in this particular unusual fascination? It's a thing that most people just take for granted, but once you start looking at it, you realize how interesting and how frustrating it is too, the state of modern English.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, my interest in writing systems and spelling probably goes back as far as I can remember. I remember as a kid, I had this book that was like about ancient Egypt and hieroglyphs and stuff. And there was a little page where it had a few different hieroglyphs and what sounds they represent. And I tried to, write my name using that and that kind of thing.
Same with
I
runes from Lord of the Rings. Did the
Runes,
same. Yeah.
yeah, absolutely. I've gone through phases of trying to learn about as many different alphabets and writing systems as I could possibly find. Um, when I was in high school, I suddenly got interested in the idea of spelling reform. It was quite literally a shower thought. I was in the shower one evening and started writing in the fog on the window, trying to come up with a new system. I remembered something that was taught to me in primary school, which is how, one of the sort of tricks and methods that they use to help kids comprehend the crazy English spelling is that the letter E sometimes makes a preceding vowel say its name, like in ban versus bane. The E on the end makes the A say A rather than A.
Mm.
And bond to bone, that kind of thing. And so I thought, what if we could, use a little diacritical mark on top of a vowel to make it say its name, and maybe even extend that to every letter, and that allows us to represent more sounds with the same letters. And so I came up with this whole system of one sound or phoneme of language corresponds to one letter. And I showed that to a few friends at school, and they were all very, very interested in. And because, as I said, this is something that at first you take for granted, but it's really interesting when you dive into it.
Mm.
At this point, I started to look up different schemes on the internet. And you mentioned conlangs or constructed languages. Well, there's a corresponding thing called a conscript or constructed script, which is, as opposed to a writing system that's evolved over many centuries, like the conventional English alphabet, it's one where usually just one person has sat down and invented something. And I came across this wonderful website called Omniglot, which interested people might find interesting because that has dozens and hundreds of different languages and writing systems showcased, including a section on English conscripts. And as soon as I saw one called Quikscript, I immediately knew that was much better than anything I could come up with myself. And so I started dedicating my time to learning that rather than trying to invent my own.
Mm-hmm.
And so what Quikscript is an alphabet of 40 letters designed specifically for English. The name makes it sound a little bit like a shorthand, and to some people it looks a bit like a shorthand, but it's not really. It is a type of longhand. It's an alphabet where each letter is separate and doesn't have any connecting strokes or variations to its shape, which makes it a bit simpler to learn and simpler to type or print. It developed from the better-known Shavian or Shaw alphabet that was named after the playwright George Bernard Shaw, who had publicly called for its invention and financed it in his will. And so that came about in the mid 20th century in the UK. So it's largely based around British English pronunciation, so it's very compatible with my own Australian English. And so I just found that really, really attractive and really interesting. And at the point I realized, because I have a very, what's the word, like, it's kind of a special interest for me. I kind of get down the rabbit hole and try to learn as much as I can about subjects like this. And so when it occurred to me that I possibly was one of the people who knew the most about this and had created some things like some of my own fonts that is pretty rare at the moment, I decided to make my own website for it, which I think is how you found out about
Yeah.
it.
Yep, indeed. Power of the internet.
Yes.
And there have been other attempts at reforming English spelling by creating a better alphabet. Because I mean, we should probably wind back a little bit and talk about some of the reasons why English is so weird. Both as a spoken language, it's got a few peculiarities, and its writing system is a bit of a dog's breakfast as well too.
Yeah, totally.
And what a lot of people don't realize is English is a hybrid of Romance and Germanic languages, are the two that were kind of smushed together. And this kind of thing happens in biology all the time. You'll get two fairly distinct species hybridizing, and then you end up with two genomes basically crammed in one organism. And English is a bit like this. We often have multiple ways of saying the same basic word, and one of them will be originally a Romance, like a Roman version, and the other one will be a Germanic version, and they can. It gives the language kind of flexibility. Like they'll mean slightly different things, like a king and kingly and royal are like an example of those, I think, from the top of my head. They mean basically the same thing,
You know,
but
cow and beef, which comes
yeah,
from bœuf, I think, or something like that.
yeah. So that's all up and down the language. And I think English is particularly prone to taking up loan words as well. Made worse because we like sailed all over the whole world and interacted with other people. But compared to like French, where they have like an allergy to officially incorporating other languages' words, they have like a department of official French words. And if foreign words start bleeding in, they try and make a French version that's like officially sanctioned to keep French pure. English is the opposite. Like every time we touch another culture, we'll just like, oh, we'll take this, we'll take that. So then we have to deal with the spelling of all of those words that are often from really different languages too. But I think that makes English a really dynamic language as well too. But then when you come to spelling it and torturing children for 12 years to learn how to handle it, you end up with all sorts of issues. Um, and like English standardization of spelling happened relatively late. And I think I remember seeing some of the people who were involved in that effort modified the spellings of words to try and encode their origin. So, like Greek words would be spelled in one weird way, and it just added more confusion, unnecessary confusion to people who didn't care whether it came from Greek or Roman or Germanic.
Mm.
And there was a vowel shift due to the Black Death in the middle of this process when spelling was being standardized and people with different accents moved all over the place, and that messed up all of the vowel sounds. Um, and you end up with a final product that's been standardized today. When you have people that come from a standardized phonetic language like Spanish, and then they find out that we do spelling bees, where it's like there's, great talent that you can spell your own language, and they're like, what's that all about? Like, can't you just like write down the sound of the word? And you write like 99% of the times. So yeah, though I do have one interesting question to throw in. Are there advantages to having a really complex writing system? And I wonder if it functions to some degree like a cultural immune system, that when like foreign entities like spies who don't speak English try and like get involved in an English speaking society, it's a barrier to entry that makes it difficult to blend in and seem like you're supposed to be there.
That is an interesting benefit. I suppose that is, you're absolutely right. Um, in fact, oftentimes when you're speaking to non-native speakers, you can tell when they've learnt certain words by reading them rather than hearing them spoken, because they'll do what's called a spelling pronunciation, which is where you just make your best guess applying the general rules. But as we know, that's notoriously inaccurate.
Hmm.
Other potential benefits are in the fact that there's so many different accents and dialects of English around the world, all pronounced in sometimes very different ways, but having the same spelling does provide a kind of unifying force, which, due to spelling pronunciations, may potentially prevent too much deviation, but history has shown that sort of happens anyway. There are divergent accents in America and the UK and Southern Hemisphere. So yeah, it's interesting to see how this will continue into the future. Um,
I'm interested to play around one day with the idea of a, what would you call it? It's like a synthetic vowel or consonant shift to make a new accent. To deliberately, I call it hyper Scottish. That like you mess around
okay.
with the sounds so much that once you, it's like Pig Latin on steroids. Like once you understand the patterns and you get your ear in, you can speak English in this new register fluently. But if
Yeah.
you haven't gone through that training and practice, it's unintelligible. Like some people go to Scotland and they can't tell what anyone is saying, even though they are speaking
Yeah.
a version of English. Yeah, so that's oh, and it's worth pointing out too, one thing that's weird about English is it's got a lot of vowel sounds, both in terms of pure vowel sounds. That's why we've only got 5 letters for vowels, but we have all of these weird rules for modifying the sound because we don't have enough letters for the vowels.
Here we have digraphs and trigraphs using 2 or 3 symbols to represent one sound, which is a thing that most languages don't need to do.
Yeah,
Quikscript, my favorite alphabet, for example, has 15 vowel letters, which
yeah,
is much more suitable
it's
and a little bit
explicit.
more resistant.
Yeah, yeah. And English has a lot of diphthongs and monophthongs as well, as when you run multiple vowel sounds together. What's a good one?
You mentioned the Great Vowel Shift earlier. A
Mm.
good example of something that has resulted in a weird spelling that also is why English uses its vowel letters so differently to continental European languages. The OU in a word like bout. Originally, that was a sort of an oo sound, as in Norman French, and I think French today uses OU for the same sound, as in oué.
Hmm.
The great vowel shift around the Middle Ages and early Renaissance resulted in that diphthongizing going from oo to ow.
Mm.
And so now that's why OU represents the ow sound, which is very strange if you think about it.
Mm.
And in some dialects, that's, considered, you can break it up in different ways. Dictionaries will represent that with the letter A followed by this weird Greek upsilon looking letter, because phoneticians analyzed it as R followed by U or U. But you could also think of it as some kind of lower vowel like R followed by the W, the W sound,
Mm.
that
Mm.
semivowel or glide, ow.
Yeah, I recently found out that some ancient languages, like ancient Greek and ancient Persian, used to have many more complex vowel sounds like diphthongs, and they went through a phase where they stripped them out. And it's another thing I would love to play around with. It's like, what would English sound like if you got rid of all of the diphthongs and trithongs? Would it
Hmm.
still would like there'd be places where it would be ambiguous about what it's saying, but I mean we already have homophones, like the same word sound meaning distinctly different things, and you figure it out by context normally
Hmm.
what it actually is referring to.
Hmm.
So yeah, it'd be really fun to play around with that at some point. Like let's just turn the dials on English up and down and see what happens.
Yeah, it's interesting. Usually, um, there is a bit of resistance towards creating homophones, as you say. Like when sound shifts happen, usually multiple sounds that are close to each other shift at the same time to avoid becoming ambiguous or combining. But that
Mm,
can still happen. Like in American English today, most younger speakers have the same sound in cot, as in C-O-T, and court, or C-A-U-G-H-T.
Mm, mm.
We still distinguish them. Don't know for how much longer, but at the moment we do. But yeah, sometimes sounds do combine when they're at risk like that, when they're very close to each other.
And there's something so biological about how natively spoken languages evolve. Like when they have a problem, like, oh, this word isn't distinct enough, it's easy to confuse it with something else, and then the meaning gets confused. People spontaneously figure out ways of inventing new words to make that differentiation. And likewise, when a word is no longer used or it's redundant, it just kind of dies off, it goes extinct.
Mm.
Um, and it seems to be a dynamic that's very difficult to engineer into a language. You can't, it's very difficult for one person to just sit down in a quiet room and create a language that has all of this organic feel to it.
Mm.
It's a little bit like architecturally designed cities, like Canberra was just created on a blueprint and then dropped from the sky onto the landscape. And it's lovely in many ways, but I lived there for a while and it feels weird compared to every other city that just kind of grew one decision at a time. So yeah, I think there's similar issues at play there. But again, we're going to talk more about technology at the end. There might be opportunities for technology to facilitate. I mean, Vioso is a perfect example of this. It's a language that evolved through a group of people trying to figure out how to communicate with each other, and it
Mm.
ended up being. I think it's been much more successful than many of the designed languages that are just kind of toy models.
Yeah, yeah, the initial conception's one thing, but then as soon as the realities of real world use come into play, that can completely change things.
Mm. So do you want to tell us a bit more about Quikscript?
Yeah, sure. So the way it works is every letter is written with a single stroke of the pen. Um, and sometimes there's little curves or loops or angles. But the idea is you don't lift the pen and do another stroke, as in like the letter T or
Mm,
F.
mm,
Consonants are mostly represented by tall or short letters. So much like our regular lowercase, there are some that have an ascender, where it goes up higher, like in F or H or B, and some where it descends or goes below the writing line, like G or Y or J. And most of the vowels, or all of the vowels, are written with a short letter, which is just like our A, E, or U.
mhm.
And so there's 25 consonant letters, and the alphabetical order helps to remember them in a way because they start towards the front of the mouth with words for P and B. They're called pipe and bob. Then it moves back, tut, deed, kick, gig, thoth, thither, fife, valve. And so they start with the stop consonants, which is like the ones where the airflow through the mouth is stopped, as in
Mhm.
pipe and bob. Then the affricates, which is like a kind of rough sound where we continue to blow air through our mouth whilst doing something with our tongue, like an F type sound or sh. Before finishing with the sort of the sundries like your y and w sound and h and even the archaic wh, which I think was added at the behest of American English speakers who in the 1960s still retained that sound, as in which, what, white, although most of us don't really use that sound these days.
Mm.
And it finishes up with all the vowels, 15 of them, as I said. So they divide them into diphthongs and monophthongs, but they all get given one letter because although you could analyze diphthongs like I and A as two monophthongs, that varies between accents.
Yeah.
So it's easier just to give it one letter rather than two letters, which might be fine for people speakers of one accent, but might be confusing for other people.
Mm.
There are no connecting strokes between letters, like in conventional cursive, which gets very scribbly. Where one letter finishes, you can immediately start writing the next letter. So you can conjoin letters or even entire words can be like a single long stroke. But if you must lift the pen to write the next letter, then you should do so. And it's not considered the end of the world. And so that greatly simplifies learning it and reading and also printing and typing.
Also, not the end of the word.
Yes, yes. Pardon the pun. They did introduce a few variant forms of letters to make that a bit easier because in practice, people, and I am inclined to agree, it's really satisfying to be able to write words continuously rather than having to lift the pen. And so there's a few letters where, for example, the top half is different, but the bottom half is the same for all of them. You can write them with only the top half, which means that you finish in a slightly different place, which allows you to make different sorts of connections to different sorts of letters, which is, adds a bit of interest and makes it really, really satisfying to use. So it's one of the more shorthand-esque features that are incorporated, which some people find really interesting.
Can I ask a quick question?
Absolutely.
So, the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis that the structure of language influences how people think. And it's contentious whether it's real or not. People are constantly
Yeah,
having
okay.
arguments. Does it apply to scripts? If you're writing the same language but in a different alphabetical system, have you noticed it changes how you think in that language on the page?
Oh, that's really tough. It's hard for me to say, but yeah, I'm not going to say it's impossible. First thing that comes to mind is we were talking earlier about homophones, words that sound the same but are spelt differently. In Quikscript or any other phonemic writing system, all such words will have exactly the same spelling. And it's a bit like spoken language where you just have to use the context to determine which word is which. It does introduce a bit of ambiguity because, we all learn conventional writing first, so we're used to the idea that different words might have different spellings and we associate that with different things like pair and pair, P-E-A-R versus P-A-I-R. So it's just something to get used to. Arguably, it does use different areas of the brain. We're having to actually interpret it more along the lines of spoken language rather than kind of morphological or logographic writing, where we write words or units of meaning as opposed to sounds. But yeah, that's definitely something. It's hard for me to say. I'm nobody's scholar.
Yeah, yeah. But I mean, there's probably not that many people who are fluent in writing this script. Like you've practiced it enough that it's probably relatively effortless by now.
I can read it at a kind of slow-ish speaking pace when I get into it. I've transliterated a few old public domain books and read those. So I've read probably a few 100,000 words in the script. And yeah, practice makes perfect. It gets easier all the time. The first time I read, pages of text in it, it was very taxing. It's almost like I could physically feel the neural connections being formed in my brain. I actually got like my brain felt tired afterwards, but that wears off after a while, and you get used to it. One thing that
Oh, sorry, you go.
So yeah, one thing that everyone finds when learning it is that writing is much easier than reading at first. Once you've learnt all the letters, most people can pretty fluently write whatever they want without having to constantly look at the chart to remember things. But when it comes to reading, it's much more slower and taxing, which is an interesting effect that we've found.
I guess that might be because when you first start reading standard English, you're still kind of sounding out and then recognizing every word as you go. And it's a later stage where whole words become so familiar that you just read them as a whole pattern. I'm guessing that it might just be a matter of time and transition and immersion. That
Yeah.
for a new language like this, you don't always get the opportunity to do years and years and years of nothing but that language.
No, exactly. And it's hard because, yeah, where most people can read very quickly and easily because we've been doing it our whole lives, but using a different alphabet, suddenly we're starting from scratch. And it is frustrating at first because you feel like a small kid again, sounding words out letter by letter. It can be frustrating. You have to force yourself to push through that and reach the stage where it becomes easier.
It's like brushing your teeth with your non-dominant hand. If you like injure your main hand and you have to do it, it's like being
Mm,
3 years old again, remembering like how complicated and
mm.
challenging it was. You had to really
Yeah, we
concentrate.
really take it for granted. Mm.
Um, Now let me think. We could probably talk a bit about how technology could be uh, catalyze this whole process. Do you have any thoughts on like we're going through a bit of an AI and tech revolution at the moment. Before we get into the new stuff, what about the old stuff? Like handwriting this script probably works very well, but you said you've made some computer fonts with it. How do you handle what was it, 40 letters on a standard English keyboard?
Well, that is another thing that is notoriously fractured. As with any community-based project, if you have 100 people, you'll have 150 different ideas of how to do something.
Mm.
Just one of the, pros and cons of one genius designer versus designed by committee. That's a whole other discussion, isn't it? But yeah, I've counted probably at least a dozen different schemes for typing. Actually creating a font with as many characters as you want, that's the easy part
Mm.
because the way computer fonts work is there's effectively an unlimited number of glyphs or shapes that they can contain, and they can be connected to one or more code points or like character values
Mm.
where each letter or symbol gets a corresponding number. For
Mm.
example, our capital A is number 65. And so there's no standard for Quikscript because that's a bit of a niche alphabet that doesn't have a very large following. There is actually for the earlier Shavian, that is officially encoded.
Mm.
So you can even send messages on, Messenger or Twitter or Discord using that script because computer and phone manufacturers have put those fonts into their system fonts. But once you've got your font with your glyphs in it and associated code points, then you have to make a keyboard layout.
Mm.
And so, yeah, I've counted over a dozen different schemes that people have come up with. I came up with my own, which is a bit of a combination of a few other people's, but it's actually, just for the sake of learning it easier, I based it on conventional script. So like
Or like a QWERTY layout.
yeah, exactly, the QWERTY layout. Yeah, so like the P key produces the Quikscript letter, which also represents the P sound, because that's what you would typically associate with the main sound value of that letter. And like the I key makes the I letter, but if you hold Shift, it makes the I letter.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so a few people have found that that scheme works well for them because it's easy to learn. Is it really convenient to actually use? It's kind of no worse than typing conventional English with QWERTY. It does mean that you're constantly using the Shift key, in the middle of words, which is something that we're not really used to. That is a bit more cumbersome. And so other people have come up with schemes where it's like one key per letter. So then you have to use the number keys and some of the punctuation keys to type letters, which is, and then you end up with people. Some people write on their keyboards or print out overlays so they can remember what all the keys do. It's a bit more of a learning curve. But in a world where this is actually more of a widespread thing that people use, that would probably be a system that we would use.
Yeah. Have you ever played around with the keyboards? I don't know the formal name of them, but they're like a shape where you slide each finger into a slot. And so you've only got like five.
Oh, corded keyboards.
Yeah, and then there's combinations of keys that you
Mm,
press at the same time. And apparently, even with standard English, once you get practice with them, you can type like twice as fast because your fingers aren't constantly having to move
mm.
to a
Yeah,
different
yeah,
location without making a mistake.
yeah. I never have actually, but yeah, I've heard that is the fastest type of keyboard available.
Mm.
Um,
And I would imagine that changing the writing script and the physical interface at the same time would have benefits. Like if you had to go back to typing in standard English, doing it on a different kind of keyboard, like a conventional keyboard, would kind of give your brain different gears that it can fall into.
I think so, where brains like to sort of categorize and compartmentalize things. So yeah, having a radically different interface would probably make it easier to switch between them.
Mm.
Yeah, like some people, you see there are alternatives to the QWERTY layout for even conventional writing, like Dvorak, and people who have their own laptop set to Dvorak, say, and then have to use someone else's computer with QWERTY. It's a bit of a hurdle to sort of switch your brain back into it. I know whenever I get into an automatic car, my left foot's always stomping the ground every time I go to, take a corner or whatever, because everything else is the same, and that's what we're used to.
It's a bit like people who learn Spanish and then they learn Italian, and there's like enough similarities that it tangles up differentiating the two systems.
Having a kind of just going back to chorded keyboards, like you mentioned, having a system like that can potentially be really useful where there is a certain what's the word? Orthogonality in the writing system. As I think we'll touch on a bit later, your one that you've come up with, where there's kind of a couple of different axes of like shape versus direction or position. Quikscript has a little bit of that as well. There are some shapes that just get rotated different ways. And you could, for example, have one button that you hold which controls the shape and another button that you press or something which controls the direction. And if you press them both at the same time, then you get that symbol.
Yeah.
And that would certainly be a way to make it a bit more intuitive, a bit more easier to learn. And it also could be used in things like video game controllers, like hold down one of the face buttons and then move the joystick in a certain direction, and you could type a lot more quickly that way than having to use the D-pad to, move the cursor on an on-screen keyboard and press the button to type each letter one by one.
One potential advantage as well of phonetic alphabets could be to make text to speech, speech to text and text to speech much simpler. Like it's just a direct sound to letter correspondence. So the computer wouldn't have to do all of this extra work like small children have to do, trying to figure out, oh, what's the
Definitely,
official
yeah.
way of saying that, putting that word on a page.
Yeah, in the last few years, we've really brute forced that with huge amounts of computational power with AI and neural networks. So that problem is kind of solved nowadays. But certainly 30, 40, 50 years ago, I'm sure the computer scientists working on computer speech, they would have loved to have a more phonemic writing system. It would have really made their lives easier.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, in the future, it still could be an advantage if that functionality becomes more ubiquitous, if you can shrink down the models so that they can, be much simpler. They that could facilitate their rollout. I mean, soon your microwave could be speech to text and
Yeah,
text to
yeah, we could
speech.
have that, sci-fi thing where your smart watch or little PDA type device can translate between different languages, and you can speak into it, and it's a small battery powered thing that deals with language. At the moment, we're still a long way off on that because AI takes too much electricity and too much computing power to run at the moment for things like that.
I was reminded as well, as someone who writes a bit of fiction, in conventional English spelling, there's this difficult thing people try to do sometimes with dialogue. They try and accent it in a way that recreates the spoken accent of that person. Like they mess around and use some non-conventional spellings that an English speaker interprets the sounds in a way that sounds like that accent. And it's kind of cringe and awkward. If you had a true phonetic alphabet, you could just actually write exactly how people sounded. It would be such a
Yeah.
interesting
Yeah,
power.
that kind of thing is challenging because it also usually only makes sense if the reader has a certain accent, because then they expect certain letters to have certain sound correspondences. It may not be what the author actually intended.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a really messy and complicated system.
It's one of these things you do with a very light touch. So you just suggest the color of that accent without bogging people down.
Yeah.
Can you see any other ways that technology could facilitate a reform of English spelling?
It would definitely make it easier if, for example, we lived in a world where, one brave government had implemented some kind of spelling reform or alphabet switch. One of the the big problems and barriers to that is that there's so much written material around in the old system. And there would have to be this period where students have to learn both systems for a long time, and scholars have to learn both systems forever to be able to read everything written in the before times. At the moment, most of us have probably used Google Translate. If you have it on your phone, you can point it at something written in a foreign language, and it will actually show up on the screen, word for word, with a transliteration or a translation into English. That type of thing could absolutely be used. You could have a browser extension that translates things automatically. Even with present day technology, there's certainly a lot of things that could make a transition easier. And there's a lot of technologies that could be used to make learning easier. Anything from as simple as, apps or programs that do with sort of flashcards, or like language learning type systems where you have to fill in the blank, or you slowly learn new spellings bit by bit, to systems that try to take advantage of the psychology of learning by automatically gauging what level of knowledge you currently have and giving you exercises that are designed to just push you slightly outside of your comfort zone, keep you in the zone of proximal development in learning psychology terms.
Well, the biggest barrier will obviously be adult learning because they, have no incentive to put themselves in knots. But I could imagine a system online where one letter at a time is changed out, and then the context of all of the unchanged letters helps remind you over and over again what that is. And
Yeah,
you could do like a new letter a week. Within a year, you've got Quikscript. You've learnt it, and
absolutely. And
just by reading and interacting like you were ordinarily.
yeah, that may be the most painless way to create mass adoption.
Mm.
I, for one, forced myself sort of cold turkey is the wrong term, but like I just tried to learn everything all at once, which is possibly the most painful way of doing it. But yeah, I've certainly seen a number of primers where people have taken, a story or a text and exactly as you said, they change one letter at a time, or like one sound, write it with the new letter, which gives you the context of the familiar words and spellings. But then by the end, the entire thing has been changed into the different spellings. So
I'm guessing that's a lot easier for consonants than for vowels because English vowel spelling is so messed up. Like you actually need to restructure English spelling often when you just have the right single vowel sound rather than combinations and patterns of vowels.
yeah, or because the consonants are a lot more sort of constant, a bit more concrete,
Yeah.
actually learning the alternate vowels first may be a good choice because
Oh, yeah, yeah, I see what you mean.
there's 5 or 6 conventional vowel letters corresponding to about 15 in a phonemic system. If you replace all of those first, as long as you know what they mean, that's kind of easier because there's less of them than the consonants, and the consonants are a bit more familiar.
When you think about it too, a lot of older writing systems didn't even have vowels. They just used the consonants and you can do that with modern English today. You can take a paragraph, strip out all of the vowels and squish it all together, and you can still pretty much figure out like what 95% of it is just by how it all fits together.
Yeah, it's largely dependent or partly dependent on the language itself. Some languages, to this day, are written with what's called an abjad, which is like an alphabet, but the vowels are either not written or they're written with a diacritical mark. Some languages, particularly in South and Southeast Asia, are written with what's called an abugida, which is again somewhere between an alphabet and a syllabary, where each symbol represents a consonant followed by some kind of default vowel, usually R, and then you can change that or delete that vowel with a diacritical mark. Other languages still have one symbol per syllable, and that's really only suitable for a few languages where the syllable structure is very limited, say Japanese, where there's only about 50 something possible syllables. You can feasibly have one symbol for each syllable, and that's quite convenient.
I was going to point out too, Korean is one example I know of a very successful spelling reform.
Mhm.
Do you know much about that? Do you want to tell the
I know a
quick
little bit
story?
about Korea. Yeah, I'm nobody's expert on Korean, but the Hangul writing system was created a few centuries ago because at that time the Korean language was written with Chinese characters, and that's notoriously hard to learn because there's thousands of them and they correspond to words or units of meaning rather than sound.
And
And especially when you apply that to a foreign language, as Korean was, the Korean language is not much like Chinese. It's very, very difficult, and only a few select scholars and educated people could read and write. And that was a problem because it's better for a country if everyone can read and write. If everyone's educated, that makes the country a lot more productive and successful. And so they created a new system which is incorporates kind of feature rule writing where the shapes of the letters actually correspond in some way to how they're pronounced, which I think just makes it a bit easier to learn and it
mm,
makes it more intellectually satisfying. And another way that they adapted it to their culture was that they write the letters in square syllable blocks. So if you squint at first glance, it kind of looks like Chinese writing.
hmm
And so at the time, that probably helped its adoption because to the people at the time, it looks like writing. So it
hmm
makes it a bit more palatable. It's less, novel and radical, which kind of puts people off. And I definitely think that's probably the most successful example of a constructed script that was pretty much created by one person, as far as we know, in all of history. There's only a small handful of other examples of languages where the writing system was created in recent times rather than being evolved or adapted from something else.
There's an indigenous American writing system, I think, was one other example, but with more limited use.
Yeah,
What little tidbit with
there's a couple I
Hangul?
know of. Yeah, the
What,
Cherokee script was
yeah, that's
created
the one.
by a guy who had seen English writing, but hadn't learned how to read. Nobody had taught him, and so he went home and if you look at it now, you can see what looks like our capital letters and even numerals, but they're used in for very different sounds because he didn't know what they represented, but he knew that these symbols represented spoken language in some way, and that's actually a syllabary as well.
Mm-hmm.
So there's about I think 40 or 50 symbols. Each one represents one syllable, and to this day that's used for the Cherokee language. In Canada as well for the Cree languages, among others. I believe it was a missionary who wanted to teach people there how to read and write. He created a system which is actually really satisfyingly simple because there's only a small number of symbols, but by having four different rotations for each symbol, along with a little dot, a diacritical mark that doubles the number of symbols, we can create something that has only got a small number of shapes to learn, but allows for a much wider variety of sounds to be spelt. So it kind of reduces the learning curve for people, and that was apparently very successful. And within a few years, there was like a 99% literacy rate. So that's another really successful example.
One little interesting tidbit with the Hangul story is that the Emperor Sejong, who like spearheaded this project, was smart enough to hide the entire project from the scholars because he knew that they would take it as a threat. If everyone
Mm.
could read, they wouldn't be special anymore. They wouldn't have this very unique, very valuable skill set. And yeah, he waited until it was ready to launch before he even got it on the radar.
Mm.
Otherwise, he would have faced enormous resistance within his own court.
Yeah, I hadn't heard that aspect of the story, but that's an interesting aspect. It's what is it? It's a kind of human pride or even masochism, right? It's almost like a hazing procedure that we force our children to go through. It's like I had to suffer to learn reading and writing, so I'll make you suffer too.
Yeah, yeah.
And also, if I could do it, then you can too, which kind of ignores how difficult it is for certain people. Everyone's brain's different. It is easier for some people than others.
Well, on that topic, I brought up the idea of Unspell, another constructed script by Dmitry Orlov, a guy I've been reading
Mm.
for years, and he specifically designed the letters to make them compatible with people with dyslexia. So English is unusual for the number of rotated and reflected letters that all kind of jumble in some people's brains. And he specifically designed a script that didn't have that issue. And he reported children that were having really hard time reading English scripts just thrived when they learned how to use that particular script.
Okay,
Um,
yeah, yeah. Admittedly, I don't know much about dyslexia and how that works, because I've heard conflicting things. For example, the Canadian Aboriginal syllabics apparently were very successful despite having rotated copies of
mm,
the same symbol. So I think there's it's a complex mechanism. There's a few different forces at play
mm,
with dyslexia and learning languages. There's a kind of certain balance of complexity versus simplicity in different aspects, which result in it being difficult or easy for different people.
mm, mm. Um, well, should I do a quick outline of my I guess I'll say it's embryonic and ambitious idea about a writing system. I've given you a couple of the details, but
Yeah, yeah, I've got a diagram that you sent me here. Do you have a
yeah,
name in mind for the system?
I don't actually yet. It's that early in the process, but I'll go through the basic
It's the
thinking
hardest
behind
part,
it.
choosing a name.
Yeah. So the basic thinking behind it is modern writing systems are designed for pen and paper. So the way the letters are constructed, and Quikscript is a really good example of that, that it's optimized for that particular writing technology. And I was curious to see if I could come up with an optimum, I guess you'd call it post-apocalyptic, post-collapse form of writing that uses much simpler technology because uh, in throughout history, like paper has been a really precious resource, and it's only recently that we've made, so much paper that we can afford to just scribble on it and throw it away. And if you look further back, there's writing forms like cuneiform from Sumeria, where a pointed stylus, a little kind of pointed triangle, was applied to wet clay in various patterns to make writing. And when that was fired, you end up with this really durable form of writing that lasts, well, there's mountains of these things. You can dig them up in the Middle East. And, people spend their whole life reading like shopping receipts from, 5,000 years ago. And it got me thinking, it's like, could we combine these ideas in a different physical medium for writing and get a whole lot of benefits out of it and design an alphabet optimally at the same time? So, the writing medium I'm thinking of is similar to what the Romans used with wax tablets. So that's like the temporary form of the writing, and you impress shapes onto that wax tablet. And if you want to make an archival form of that writing, you do what's called a slip cast. So you have a kind of runny clay mixture that you pour into that pattern, and the clay gets down in all the little nooks and crannies. And then when that dries and hardens, you can fire it, and it'll become a really durable, long-lasting version of that writing. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized there's other possible benefits of this. So, one thing you can do with that clay tablet is you can press it into another piece of wax that's soft enough and copy. So, you can then repeat the process of pouring the clay into it and make another version of it. You could also potentially put a pigment on that clay tablet and press it onto something like paper or cloth to mass produce like temporary copies of that archival information. Um, and the other final benefit is that if you design the script properly, you should be able to read the clay tablet with your fingertips, which mean that you can do all of those cultural activities at night if you don't have a form of lighting that's suitable. And even in like the medieval times when people were using, candlelight or lanterns, they often reported that it was very difficult to do reading at night. It would hurt their eyes after a very short period of time. Whereas if you have a braille type system, you can read anytime.
Hmm.
So yeah, I'm like, can we design all of these things in? So the system I came up with was a bit of a compromise with Sumerian. So Sumerian just has one stylus tip that is just a pointy triangle. So you have to use really complex combinations of that pattern to like build up the information you want to transmit. So instead, I'm like, how many stylus tips could one person handle? And I think four ends up being around about the right amount. And what you can do is have different shapes on those four tips that are distinct enough that you can read them by fingertip. And then each of those shapes is rotated through eight different rotations because it's very easy to turn the stylus before you press it into the wax to make a distinctive letter. And I have to do some physical experiments to see how easy it is to read these different shapes that I'm thinking will work, how well the physical process of like making the objects works in different media as well. Like there's all these different things that need to be optimized in practice. So yeah, I've got many different dials, and yeah, it's basically one symbol is for all of the voiced consonants, and then there's a matching symbol for the unvoiced versions of those. And again, like you were saying before, from front of the mouth to back of the mouth as the symbol rotates. So it's kind of intuitive how they fit together. And if you slightly misinterpret the exact rotation, you're not likely to end up misinterpreting what the whole word is saying. It's like when people speaking, they sometimes slightly mispronounce their sounds, but you can go with the flow and still figure it out.
Yeah.
And then there's one symbol for all of the odd bod consonants that kind of don't fit into a bigger pattern, like the R's and the M's and those kind of things. And then you have one symbol for the vowels. And vowels are interesting because they actually slide into each other. There's the people who do phonetic analysis have a vowel chart where different languages tend to locate their vowel sounds in kind of overlapping areas. And there isn't the same clear distinction that you get with consonants. So it might even be possible with that rather than having distinct rotations that you can gradually change the sound. There's a really interesting linguist called Dr. Lindsay, I think.
Jeff Lindsay.
Jeff Lindsay, yeah. And he has looked at this and he's compared it to color, that you can have a rainbow of pure colors from like 700 nanometers wavelength at red all the way through to I think it's 300 nanometers for purple, but you can curl that back on itself to end up with complex colors that are like combinations, and the vowel chart can be analyzed in a very similar way, so you could maybe do something similar with that. And yeah, I'm imagining this as a writing system where you have the four styluses in your offhand and like maybe held between the fingers, and then you use your dominant hand to pick the right tip, rotate it, and press it. So it could actually be a fairly quick system to write. There wouldn't be, strokes for each letter. It's just one press at the right rotation.
Yeah, I can't think of his name right now. There's a mathematics YouTuber who writes on a whiteboard in his videos, and he uses a black pen and a red pen, and he holds them in the same hand and switches between them seamlessly. I need to learn how to do that, but it just reminds me of that.
So yeah, any thoughts? Like, I can see parallels with other, and it's funny you talk about going back to that moment where you're writing an alphabet system in the fog on the glass, and you came up with solutions that when you go looking in this field, people have already been doing that. I think a lot of European languages use diacritics above letters to clarify which vowel sound you're referring to. And yeah, the rotation of letters you just mentioned in an indigenous language.
Yeah, it's
The
kind
order
of
from in the
convergent
mouth.
evolution,
Yeah,
isn't it?
it's exactly.
Because really, human language is only has so many differences that it can possibly have,
And they're all trying to solve the same problem.
exactly. Yeah, and so I like the way you've incorporated that kind of orthogonality between the manner of articulation and the place of articulation, like the place in the mouth where you put your tongue to say a certain sound. You can actually incorporate that in the writing system, as a few like Hangul have done, but this really takes it to an extreme. And as well as taking advantage of the continuous versus discrete nature of the vowels, that's really interesting. That would probably solve the problem we were talking about of, in fiction writing dialogue where someone uses a funny accent. You could just do a slight non-standard rotation of your vowel letters that would get that across without impeding the meaning too much. Yeah. I'd be interested to see how well that could translate into writing in the real world, and certainly for for people who are really keen, interested like us, we might take special care. But then you give it to the general public, and you'll have people who are rushed and scribble. If you have a doctor trying to use this system, I do wonder if the 8 different levels of rotation is possibly a bit too fine. In my experience, when there's the same symbol that's rotated, usually there's only 4 cardinal directions that are used
Yeah,
rather
yeah.
than 8. But certainly with a bit more slower and careful writing or typing, it shouldn't be a problem. But that's definitely something which,
I
yeah,
did play around with that variable. It's a trade-off between the number of styluses you need to juggle at once
yeah.
versus the clarity of the rotation, and maybe 6 rotations would be the best compromise.
Yeah, and this similar thing in spoken language that conlangers deal with, and written language that we deal with in constructed scripts, is there's that trade-off between ease of transmission and ease of reception. Generally, we want to make it simpler to make it easier to produce, but more complex makes it easier to read or to hear,
Yeah.
because it helps the person on the receiving end.
Yeah, our vocal tracts and our hearing is far more evolved for the purpose of language than our fingers and our writing implements. They're still catching up. They've only been doing it for a few thousand years. Oh, well, I mean,
Yeah,
it's interesting to get outside perspectives on this kind of thing because it's one of these kind of add it to the pile of special interests that I've got boiling in the background.
yeah,
Once the idea grabbed me, I'm like, I couldn't put it down. And it's
yeah, no.
actually it's in a piece of fiction that I've written. It's sci-fi set in the distant future, and
Oh, cool.
they use a writing system very much like this. And it got me thinking, could I actually make this work?
Yeah, yeah. I like the post-apocalyptic thinking behind it, going back to simpler and more stable technologies that can be sort of produced anywhere in the world at any time, rather than using special materials or special resources.
And it's a
It kind
printing
of,
press and an alphabet in one.
yeah, that is brilliant, I must admit. And it kind of calls to mind how I think historians know more about like the older Egyptian empire than the more recent Egyptians, because when they switched to writing on papyrus, that medium degrades over time, and so we don't have as many written records as we do when they were using clay tablets. Because, as you say, they can be fired and preserved indefinitely rather than rotting away. So that's absolutely a benefit. And
And now we've got all of our precious data on hard drives and CDs.
yeah, which barely lasts years, let alone decades, let alone centuries.
I'm
But,
old enough to remember when CDs rolled out and they're like, these are going to last for thousands of years.
and
Let's
then
put all
five
our
years
data
later,
on
they
it.
get those green spots on the back, and you can't
Yep.
read it anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, I remember those early CDRs. Yeah, it'd be very interesting to see how historians deal with that in the future, because we're not really producing as much written material on physical media like paper anymore. Digital archaeology is probably going to be a really interesting field in a few decades as they discover techniques to recover information from hard drives that as not readable by normal means because the magnetism has faded so much over the decades and things like that.
It'll make those carbonized scrolls from Pompeii look like a walk in the park.
Yeah,
Oh.
yeah, I can't wait. Yeah, no, your system's really, yeah, it looks really interesting. Without having used it or tried it myself, it's very hard to give an appraisal.
Yeah,
But
I'm in the
yeah,
same boat. Like until I actually make objects with this writing system in them and try and engage with them, it's still kind of floating in the air. But I mean, there's opportunities to refine it. The only thing I worry about is, well, particularly today, we put such a premium on information density that you can have like one thumb drive with like, a whole library on it. Um, because this is relying on a heavy physical medium, there's a limit to how much you can cram into a form. I suspect that could go with like shorthandification of the written language, where a lot of what we write down is just padding. It's redundant. You can cut it out without losing the meaning.
yeah, yeah. And certainly in a society where there's less resources available, your priorities will be different. And people won't be reading and writing entire fiction novels for fun. Writing will serve a much more utilitarian purpose. It'll be things like, business transactions and legal records that are the most important, and everyday people probably won't do much long form reading or writing at all. Dealing with numbers and names of products will be the most important thing, and then everything else comes second.
And maybe a few poems because they're pretty
Yeah,
efficient. They have a big
yeah,
impact
yeah.
with not a lot
There's
of
always be
words.
people to keep art alive. Um,
I really love the idea that you could have like if there was some sacred or culturally significant writing in a future community that used this writing system, you could have a temple or a church where people go at night and it's all in the dark. You can build architecture that's compatible with blind people that they can get
mm,
around without bumping into things, that you could actually design this cultural shared space that it isn't meant to be illuminated, that you can get around and do your thing perfectly fine in the pitch dark, and that like all of the walls are covered in impressions of this kind of material that you can actually read the walls in the dark.
yeah, that would be a really incredible experience, I think.
Mm.
Um, yeah.
Are there any other constructed script people looking at changing the medium of writing like I've kind of stumbled into? Or do they all just assume like paper and pen or digital?
Yeah, usually they're intended to be written with paper and pen because that's the tools available to us. It's typically, young people bored at school or people like you who just go down a rabbit hole and start thinking about these things. I've seen a couple of experimental systems where people have used animated fonts, which could only be written in the present day on a computer.
Oh, wow.
And so you could have something like where, a symbol rotating in one direction is one letter, rotating in the opposite direction is a different letter. I've seen experimental systems where color is used
Hmm.
as one of the axes that you can vary to create different symbols. And that's another system which at the moment is really convenient for computers. And in fact, you can make color fonts in the present day. It would make handwriting a bit more cumbersome, but not
Mm.
impossible. But yeah, there's definitely a few directions that you could take it.
Interesting. Interesting. Um, I think we've covered everything I had on my list of talking points. Did I miss anything that you wanted to delve into?
Um, yeah, what have I got written down? Yeah. Yeah, some of the impetus or motivations for spelling reform is the fact that English-speaking countries have got some of the highest diagnosed rates of dyslexia in the world
Mm.
because English writing is kind of tied with French for being some of the most irregular. There's a huge number of different ways to spell the sounds of the language. Depending on accent, there's around about 40 different phonemes or sounds to the language,
Mm.
but some scholars have found over 1,000 different ways with our spelling system that we use to write those in the present day.
Yeah.
Um,
And as
some
an
of the re-
educator, like you're aware that we waste years of every child's life just getting up to
Mhm.
speed on this bananas system that we have for writing.
Yeah, I've heard that in some countries they spend about 1 or 2 years teaching primary school children to read and write and then move on to other things.
Yeah.
Whereas we spend our entire schooling doing it. And it's even something we place huge emphasis on with standardized testing is getting young people to, read and write honestly pretty basic passages, but yet still so many people struggle. And it's not their fault.
Mm.
It's this system that is resisted change for so many centuries. English is kind of a victim of its own success. It was one of the first languages to be written down, and that writing occurred with an alphabet that was borrowed from the Latin language, which in turn was borrowed from the Greek language, which in turn was borrowed from Phoenician, which in turn was probably inspired by ancient Egyptian. And so there's this whole chain of adaptation and evolution where people have kind of half-assed writing without really thinking it through or developing it properly.
It's
And
junk
so
DNA most of the way down.
absolutely. There's all these vestigial features that don't really make sense. And that has been compounded over so many generations, so that we have this alphabetic system where the letters and the sounds, we know that the letters should correspond to sounds in some way, but no one can agree on how to do it because of this complex history. And then combined with the changes to pronunciation over time that may or may not get reflected in spelling. So a force that tends to regularize and create uniformity in spelling is printing and transmission of written materials through books. When the printing press came to England at the end of the Middle Ages, as you mentioned before, the great vowel shift was occurring at the same time. And so we've got this spelling system that is actually mostly based in the old pronunciations before the great vowel shift, which is one of the reasons why English spelling is so different from continental European languages. Like the letter A doesn't make that sound in any other language but English. It's usually R or something like that.
Oh, a question occurred to me.
Yeah.
If an English writing system script reform is going to happen in the next, 100 years, do you have any guesses about how it will happen? Because I would suggest that it's probably not going to be an institutional reform. We're not going to have an Emperor Sejong like kind of wield his reputation to kind of convince everyone to go along with it because the momentum, the inertia of the existing system is so vast. But can you see any other ways that it could creep in and like start growing from a small kernel?
Yeah, I think at this point, because throughout history, so many people have tried to convince governments and educational institutions to introduce spelling reform. There's been a little bit of success in that in America, where Webster, the dictionary creator, introduced a few reformed spellings, which are still used in American English to this day, although thanks to that inertia and pride in the rest of the English-speaking world, we insist on writing center with RE and color with a U. And I myself will be the first to admit I quite proudly do that because if you want to be considered intelligent, you have to use standard spellings, otherwise people won't take you seriously. Which is one of the reasons why spelling reform is so difficult, because most people's first reaction is just to dismiss it as being, somehow deficient. But because the English language is not standardized or centralized, there's multiple powerful English-speaking countries with separate governments, which
Separate education systems and
education systems, and there's a lot of cross-cultural communication in media. So we need to be able to communicate with each other. That's one of the main forces that makes reform difficult, unlike languages that are smaller or only spoken in one country mostly. So at this point, I think if there is going to be any kind of shift, it's probably going to be some kind of grassroots thing led by nerdy people collaborating on the internet, and certainly web forums and places like that on the internet are one of the main places where these types of things get developed and used today.
That's definitely what I can see as being the only opportunity. It's going to be some kind of trendy internet subculture that then starts like printing t-shirts with the script on them saying all sorts of outrageous things that the old people can't figure out and like make it an inside joke, like give it an early reason to exist.
Yeah, which kind of calls to mind things like Cockney rhyming slang
Yeah.
or Polari, which is people come up with vocabulary to try to avoid being overheard, which certainly with the increasing political turmoil in the world today, we may very well see that kind of thing making a bit of a resurgence, which is interesting.
I wonder too, if you took a written script, I'm just thinking technically, if you took a written script and converted it into like an image, like a JPEG, but then you could add an artistic effect to it that made it really difficult for text recognition AI to process it. So
Like
it's
those
even
old capture systems.
yeah, the old ones with all the wiggles and stuff behind, and the computer vision just freaks out because it can't filter it as well as human brains can. So you could have this really simple, relatively low-tech way of encrypting written communications for a trendy young subculture that, wants to flaunt their uninterpretability to the rest of the internet.
Yeah, that it's a bit of a cat and mouse game, that is, because it's easier to train a machine learning system than it is to train humans to learn something.
Yeah,
And those old school captures where there's, a font that's all wiggly or has lines over the top of it, those are no longer, those are obsolete now. Those have
yeah.
been cracked years ago, and computers can now solve those better than humans can. And I think if there was a government or agency that people were trying to hide from, there's only so far you can take security by obscurity.
Yeah.
Because as soon as someone cracks the code, then it's game over, because a computer can interpret things so much faster and easier than humans can typically. So yeah,
It's one
an
reason
interesting problem.
it's one reason I think that spoken language evolution, I call them constructed argo, conargo, like Polari. I think they're more likely to be practically useful for that function of indecipherability because once you've got something digitized in text, it's much easier for machines to like shake it until the message comes out. But if you're speaking to people like we are now in a language that is basically English, but a whole lot of sounds have been like shifted around, you could potentially keep shifting those sounds, similar to how like a flu virus keeps changing its antigens every year. As long as the process of change is simple enough, then the whole community can just keep changing every time the old version of the language becomes too familiar.
Yeah, certainly. Yeah, if people in a subversive subculture were to speak in like a Pig Latin kind of way, or as you were saying, like a what is it,
Hyper
hyper
Scottish.
Scottish, yeah, that would probably be a good way of avoiding detection or being overheard by nefarious authorities. Take your writing system, just rotate the vowels by one or two places. Everyone still can communicate with each other, but the outsiders don't know what's going on.
Yeah. It's like those magic decoder rings.
Yeah, certainly.
Oh, well, I mean, this has been so much fun. Normally at the end, I get my guests to just let me know any links that you'd like put in the show notes. So if people want to follow up on anything that you've done, just tell me where to point them.
Yeah, no worries. Well, yeah, you found out about me through my website, so that's probably a great place for people to go if they want to learn about Quikscript, and as well as just its background, even if you're not so interested in learning the script itself, because that's an investment of time. It's a bit of a special interest for nerds. There's even just some information on there about where it came from and why it came about. And that website I mentioned, Omniglot, is a really good place to go if you just want to have a browse and see at the various systems people have come up with. That's where I saw, as I mentioned, the animated systems and the color systems. And people have also adapted other natural language writing systems like Arabic or Cyrillic, that's like the Russian alphabet, to write different languages. And anyone can submit to that as well. So if you've, spent a few hours or days or weeks coming up with your own writing system, and there's a bit of a story to it, then you could submit that to that website as well.
When mine gets refined, when I've got some more concrete results, literally concrete,
Yes,
when I
yes.
start pouring the molds, I'll have to share that progress there.
Yeah, certainly.
Well, Brad, thank you very much for taking the time to talk. This has been absolutely fascinating.
Thank you for having me, Shane. I'm always glad to talk to people about this, since it is such a special interest, a bit of a niche subject. Normally, most people aren't that interested.
Well, you caught my attention, so yeah, thank you very much.
I'm glad. No worries. Thanks for having me.
The Zero Input Agriculture podcast is a solo passion project built with my ample time and meagre resources. If you would like to support the show, then sign up for a paid subscription to my Zero Input Agriculture blog at Substack. As a reward, you can read all my past posts and listen to the audiobook of Taming the Apocalypse. If you prefer reading about the past and future of biological technology, you can read the ebook of Taming the Apocalypse through Amazon. And finally, please rate and review the show on whatever podcast app you use, since it helps other people find me. Or recommend the show directly to anyone who could use some inspiration to become a plant breeder themselves.